Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be turning our attention to wicked bugs. Now, I know a lot of you think all bugs are wicked. That is not the case. But we have an expert with us, Amy Stewart. Welcome back to Central Texas Gardener. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Your first book, Wicked Plants, was a runaway hit. Now you followed that up with Wicked Bugs.
Yes.
And
the sequel.
It is a sequel. It's a little bit of the dark side of gardening, and in a sense, because you're really focusing on some critters that cause enormous amounts of damage.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, the funny thing is that with Wicked Plants, it's surprising how many plants don't want to get eaten and let us know that by inflicting pain and suffering on us.
Exactly.
But we're very trusting of plants. We're ready to take anything that's green and comes out of the ground and eat that for breakfast. You know, we'll put anything in our mouth that's right, a leaf or a berry. And people find out the hard way that, you know, a lot of plants are poisonous. With bugs, believe it or not, the opposite is true. Very few of them can hurt us at all.
Sure.
There are a million species of insects on the planet, and I had to work to round up 100 or so that I think we should legitimately be afraid of.
Right, right. The legitimately we call wicked in a sense.
Right, wicked meaning they can hurt us.
Right,
yes.
Right. Well, so let's talk about some of the different characteristics that elevate a bug to wickedness.
Yeah, well, certainly if they're venomous, so if they can inflict pain, which is a defense mechanism. A lot of insects that transmit disease.
Sure.
And it's really eye-opening the number of different diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes and other biting insects.
Right.
And then some very destructive ones. So generally, I do not consider a bug to be wicked just because it eats plants.
Okay.
Because that's what they're supposed to do.
Sure.
Nature's meant to work that way. That is their food source. So when I go out in my garden and I see a lot of bug bites in my plants, I think, well, that's a good thing. I have an ecosystem here and it's working.
Sure.
But some have caused such catastrophic damage on such a huge scale that I call it wicked because they've really changed the course of civilization for us.
All right. Well, you've brought some interesting bugs along with you,
I did.
We're going to hit some of those that are wicked to humans and wicked for other reasons.
Yes.
Let's start with the human ones because I think that probably has grabbed some people's attention.
Right.
There are some truly frightening critters out there. You know, here in Texas, we like to think we're tough.
Yes.
You know, we've got fire ants, killer bees, you name it. We deal with it. But we do not deal with the giant Asian hornet, for example, which is one that you focus on.
Yes, this is an enormous hornet that lives in Japan and is coming into the cities more and more. So you see it in the summer in Tokyo, is actually digging through the trash, looking for little bits of fish that it can take back and feed to its young. But very powerful sting. There's a researcher in Tokyo who focuses exclusively on the Asian giant hornet, and he says that it feels like a hot nail through the leg when he gets stung.
Okay.
And it can,
you would remember, I think.
Yes, and it can be fatal. 30 or 40 people die every year from the sting of the Asian giant hornet.
Now, I understand that they have a favorite prey that has come up with a unique way of defending itself.
Right. So this is the really bad thing they do, is that they attack Japanese honeybees. And they send a scout out first to check out the hive. And so, and if they do invade the hive, they rip the little honeybees apart, just rip their heads off, tear them from limb to limb, steal their young, take them back and feed them to their own young, and steal the honey. So it's a terrible thing. So what the honeybees have done is that when that scout first shows up, they surround it and make a swarm around it and just sort of hover in the air and cook the hornet to death by just their body temperature.
That's amazing.
It is incredible. They raise it to exactly 116 degrees, which kills the hornet.
Well, thank goodness for the cleverness of the honeybees.
Maybe
they'll keep them at bay, or at least on that side of the Pacific Ocean.
I know, yeah.
All right, black widow spiders, and this is one I have had personal relationship with because I have actually been stung by one, and it's the only time in my adult life I've ever had to go to an emergency room.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, black widows do bite, and it is going to hurt, but you live to tell the tale, and
That's
I think
true.
this is important. So you got through it. Were you hospitalized overnight? Were you out of work?
I was at work the next day with a very bad headache. You know, but they gave, I received a shot of adrenaline and something else, but I can't remember what that something else was.
So you went to the emergency room,
Right.
so what brought on the sting, though? I think this is the key element.
Okay, well, I had cleared a lot of brush in my garden,
Right.
and I had picked it up like this and got bit in my forearm while I was carrying the brush to set it aside.
Right. So, you know, that is prime spider habitat, right? Sort of a neglected, brushy area
Sure.
is where they're going to set up their webs. So when you go charging into that, you are in their territory at that point. You know, you're
Right.
kind of asking for it. I would pile it all up on a tarp and drag the tarp around. I would not take a large load of spider habitat into my arms, right? Up against my neck and my heart.
Okay.
That would just be a tip, maybe.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty good idea. And you also had, we were talking earlier, you mentioned the fact that, you know, sometimes gloves are a good thing to use as well.
Gloves might be a good thing. Yes,
Right,
long
right.
sleeves. You know, I have those kind of long gloves that you can tuck your sleeves into. I mean, stuff like that when we're out in the garden. And this is true with plants as well. There are a lot of plants that can give a pretty bad rash, and there are
Yeah.
plant poisons that can enter the bloodstream very easily. It is not a bad idea to wear a little protective clothing out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, some of these critters are devastating to the plants in a truly kind of wicked way. And there's one that has kind of a unique association with Texas, and that's Phylloxera. And that is something that actually should be proud of in Texas, that we have some Texas grapevines, for example, that can withstand this critter.
That's right. Yeah. So when, as we were settling this country in the early 1800s, the French were sending us some of their beautiful grapevines to grow, and we were sending them some of the native grapevines to try over there. Well, what we didn't realize is that we inadvertently sent them a new pest, which is the Phylloxera, which is a tiny little creature like an aphid. And it took the French a long time to figure out what was eating their grapevines. Once they did realize that it was a bug we had sent, they also came to the very uncomfortable realization that they were going to have to take their beautiful French grapevines and graft them onto these rough and tumble, you know, John Wayne cowboy rootstock that we have over here that can resist it. And so we destroyed the French wine industry, and then we saved the French wine industry.
Ah.
Yes.
So be grateful, I guess, in Bordeaux.
Right.
Oh, grateful, maybe.
Even to this day, grapevines are grafted onto a modern variant of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the other. The grasshopper, for example, is a real
yes.
common one that
Right.
we deal with here in Central Texas.
So what people don't realize is that some, not all, some species of grasshopper, when they're under stress and competing too much for food, give birth to a generation that looks and acts completely different from them.
Oh, really?
They're bigger, darker, more ready to swarm. They are locusts.
Ah.
A locust is nothing more than a grasshopper under stress. And so we had these plagues of locusts over the American West in the late 1800s, the Rocky Mountain locust. Farmers were saying, we've never seen this thing before. And they were right, they had never seen it before because they were grasshoppers last year.
See, I have never heard this.
Yes.
I always assumed locust was a completely different species.
No, they are particular species of grasshoppers that have the ability to sort of transform in a single generation into locusts. And they were devastating to farmers in the West. A lot of people
That's
just gave
fascinating.
up. Yeah, the Rocky Mountain locust, by the way, is completely extinct. Farmers moved into this one river valley in the Rocky Mountains that was its only permanent breeding ground. And when they farmed it, they destroyed its habitat and drove them completely to extinction.
Interesting.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Right.
And maybe that's an extinction we should be happy about.
Well, it does show you how fragile any insect population can be, though. You know, really,
right.
something as common as these locusts, and that's all it took was destroying this one piece of habitat. So very much like the monarch butterflies who go to the same place in Mexico every year, these critical breeding grounds that should be protected. Although with the Rocky Mountain locusts, they were happy to see
That
them
would
go.
be a tough sell, I think.
It would have been a very tough sell to the farmers, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Butterflies are a little easier.
Yeah, right. Well, Amy, it's a phenomenal series of stories really. Wicked bugs. Best luck to you in this endeavor. And what's coming up next? Do you have another wicked on the list, real briefly?
You know, it's not wicked, but tentatively it's called The Drunken Botanist. And it's all the plants we make into booze. So I'm doing some very fun research, actually, with this one.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for being our guest today on Central Texas Gardener.
Well, thank you.
Always a pleasure. And coming up next is our friend Daphne.